Mr. Reedy, would you raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony you are about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Reeby, could you state your full name, please?
Floyd Albert Reeby.
How do you spell your last name?
R-I-E-B-E.
The subject of this deposition today is the autopsy of President John F. Kennedy. Mr. Reeby, were you present at the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Yes, I was.
Before we went on the record, I explained to you that this deposition would be under oath. Do you understand that it is under oath?
Yes, I do.
And that you have a responsibility to make statements that you are about to make as accurately and honestly as you can?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Reeby, is there anything that you can think of today that would keep you from answering any questions fully and honestly to the best of your ability?
No.
I'm going to be asking you a series of questions that relate principally to the autopsy of President Kennedy. I'd like you to let me know if any of my questions are unclear, and I will attempt to rephrase them or clarify them. You shouldn't hesitate to ask me to revise the question or restate the question if there is any unclarity in your mind. Mr. Reeby, have you ever previously had your deposition taken regarding the autopsy of President Kennedy?
No.
Have you ever spoken with any government officials who have had any role in investigating the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Once over the phone.
Could you tell me just a little bit about that, when it approximately was?
I don't even remember that. At the time, I didn't want to talk to the man because I didn't know that the security had been lifted. And I didn't talk to him about what I saw or what happened that night.
Were you under the impression that the person who called you worked for the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Yes.
Did you ever subsequently speak to a person on the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
I don't think so.
Have you ever spoken with any private researchers subsequently about the assassination?
Yes, I have.
Do you remember the names of any of those with whom you have spoken?
Mr. Lifton. And can't think of the other man's name, but he lives up here in Baltimore.
Is that Harry Livingston?
Livingston, yes.
Okay. I'd like to go back to your career prior to 1963. Let me just start out by asking what position you had as of November 1963.
I was a hospital corpsman, second class. I was a student at the medical photography school there in Bethesda.
What experience had you had with photography prior to November 22nd, 1963?
Just what we had in class and freelancing, just my own pictures the time I was in the service.
Who was your teacher or teachers in the photography class?
Rittenauer was one. A man by the name of Pina. I can't remember the rest of them, but Pina, I think Mr. Pina's dead. I think he died when I was in school.
Did John Stringer teach any classes?
Yeah, he did. Not that much, though. It was mostly the school staff did all the instructing.
Had you yourself been in any classes that Mr. Stringer taught?
Oh, yeah.
What was Mr. Stringer's reputation as a photographer as of November 1963, best you recall?
Best I recall, he was well regarded by people there at the hospital and the staff. But outside of that, I didn't know the person at all.
Okay. Did you receive any training in medical photography specifically?
Yes.
Was that in fact the subject of
that was
coursework?
The subject of the school.
As a part of the training that you received in medical photography, were you taught anything about autopsy photography.
Yes.
Had you completed your coursework by November 22nd, 1963?
No, I hadn't.
Approximately how much time had you spent in coursework prior to the assassination?
Class started in March, I believe it was.
That's March of 1963?
Yes.
So this would be 6 to 10 months.
In. Yeah.
How long did the course last after November of 63?
Till March the following year.
So 1 year
Yeah, it
course.
was a 1 year class.
During the course of your studying photography, did you take any courses on X-ray photography?
No, I didn't. But I had practical experience from different stations I was at taking X-rays.
What was your practical experience in taking X-rays?
Just some on-the-job training.
Had you actually taken X-rays then yourself?
Yes.
Had you taken any X-rays during autopsies?
No.
Did you receive any training on the job or otherwise regarding the interpretation of X-rays?
Very little. Very little.
Do you consider yourself now competent to make interpretations of X-rays?
No.
Prior to November 22nd, 1963, approximately how many autopsies had you witnessed?
3 or 4.
Had you witnessed by that time any autopsies of gunshot victims?
No, I don't think so.
Since or after November 22nd, 1963, approximately how many autopsies have you witnessed?
1. That was all.
So then your experience with autopsies would be in the area of 5 or so.
Yeah, about 5 or 6. No more than 6.
Was the autopsy of President Kennedy the only autopsy you witnessed where there had been a gunshot wound?
Yes.
I'd now like to go into some of the basic and standard procedures for taking autopsy photos as you understood them as of November 22nd, 1963. Was there a regular number of photographers who would be involved in an autopsy?
Normally it'd be 1.
Have you been in any autopsy, other than the autopsy of President Kennedy, where there was more than one photographer?
Yes.
Which other autopsies?
Well, it was just some that were done there at the hospital, and one of the staff instructors was with me to kind of help me along to learn the job right.
In 1963, was there recommended photography equipment that should be taken to an autopsy?
Not that I knew of. I mean, for that particular one, I didn't know what all to take.
Was there any standard procedure for lighting in an autopsy?
No. Used available light or a flash.
Were speed lights used in the ordinary course, or was that an exceptional?
No.
Speed lights?
Ordinary.
Speed lights ordinarily were used.
Yeah, because even with the surgical lamp in the autopsy room, it wasn't bright enough or had cast too many shadows to see into the cavity of the body.
Was there a standard type of film that was used in autopsies?
Just black and white or color, combination of the two.
At Bethesda in 1963, was color negative or color transparency typically used?
Either one. We used both.
There was no set procedure, one or the other that you...
Well, it depended on, I'd usually, when I'd go down, the couple of times I went down on my own, I asked, what should I use? And 6, 1, half a dozen the other. But for this one, I loaded all, I believe it was color negatives. May have had some transparencies there.
the other autopsies that you participated in, that is the autopsies other than President Kennedy, were there any identification cards or markers that would be used to be placed next to the body?
Yes.
What did those look like?
Similar to a business card, it's a little bit smaller, but it was in centimeters, and it had the National Naval Medical Center initials across the bottom to identify them as to where they were taken and to give approximate size for printing. If they wanted a one-to-one print, then they enlarge it up to the centimeter scale, up to so many centimeters, and that'd be a one-to-one scale.
Did those cards have numbers of the autopsy to assist in the identification of the person whose autopsy was being conducted?
Yes, they had a handwritten marked number on it.
In addition to the handwritten number and the other things that you said, was there any other information that was contained on these identification cards?
I don't think so.
I've been saying identification cards for it. Is there any other term that you would use to...
No, that sounds logical. I mean, I didn't know what they were, any technical name for them, just that that's what they were used for.
While you were at Bethesda, did you ever see any motion pictures taken of any autopsy?
Some video I have, yes, from the Medical Research Center. People came over in the video school there.
And approximately when did you see the videotape of an autopsy?
It was way before then, way before November. But I don't remember when.
Was there any standard procedure for the number of autopsy photos that would be taken?
No.
How would it be determined in the ordinary course how many photos would be taken?
Well, I'd usually, on my own, take what I thought would be enough. Then I'd ask the pathologist if there was anything in particular, and I'd stay until he was finished photographing whatever. If he'd find something strange in the cadaver, then we'd want to take up pictures of those. But no, there was no set amount of photos to be taken.
Now, in the ordinary course, and I'm not speaking of President Kennedy's autopsy, where was the film developed after the autopsy was completed?
In our photo lab there at Bethesda.
Who was responsible for developing the photos?
Whoever took them.
So in the other autopsies that you participated in, did you develop the film yourself? After the film was developed in the ordinary course, what happened to those photographs?
Well, they were dried and given to Mr. Stringer, and he'd go over them for technical quality. And we'd make our prints and then turn them in to Mr. Stringer, and he'd send them out to the appropriate position.
Do you know where the films ended up being filed or stored?
The films were filed, I believe, right there in Mr. Stringer's office. He had a humongous file cabinets. Many file cabinets.
When you say that Mr. Stringer would review them for technical qualities, what are the kinds of things that he would review them for, to the extent you know?
Focus, color, and if prints were going to be made out of them, he'd crop it off on a piece of plastic to show just that certain area you wanted blown up to whatever size it was.
Was there a preference in terms of the type of camera that would be used? And I'll just speak in very general terms of 4x5 versus 35 millimeter.
Well, it depended on the photographer. Quite a few of the people there liked that old Nikon. It was 35 millimeter, and that was the staff. And some of them liked that Rolex. It was a 120. But I preferred my own camera, which was a Canon 35, because it was newer and easier to use than that ancient piece of equipment they had there, or the Speed Graflex 4x5.
Can you describe very briefly what the Speed Graflex 4x5 is?
It used to be called the press camera. most of your newspaper photographers used that specific type of a camera. They had produced a film of 4x5, I think it was, sheet film. You had to use holders, and then they came out with what they call the film pack, which held 12. You just pull the tab like you do on the Polaroid.
Was the Speed Graflex typically a tripod-mounted camera or a handheld camera?
It could be done either way. It depended if you were using flash and you had a high enough shutter speed, then you didn't have to use a tripod. But if you're going to do close-ups, then you use a tripod because your film shutter speed was a lot slower and a better chance for movement.
Other than the autopsy of President Kennedy, had you seen a 4x5 or large format camera used without a tripod?
Oh yes, I've used it myself quite a bit.
Did all of the autopsies that you saw also use tripods?
No, not all of them use tripods.
So some of them then would use 4x5 cameras without tripods,
yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you complete the photography course in March 1964? Since that time, have you had any formal training in photography?
Yes, I was transferred down to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and I was there for a little bit more than a year. And about 6 months of that was our director there said it would be more or less like an internship. I'd be working with civilian staff and to have more training, which I enjoyed that, and I thought it was appropriate.
After AFIP, did you take any additional courses in photography?
No.
What work in photography, if any, did you do after you completed your time at AFIP?
Well, I was transferred down from AFIP down to field medical research in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I was the medical photographer for that unit for about a year and a half.
After your work in Jacksonville, did you have any other formal employment that involved photography?
No. Just yearbook photographer aboard ship, but that was it.
Did you ever serve in Vietnam?
Yes.
Did you have any responsibility for photography in Vietnam?
No.
I'd now like to go to the events of November 22nd, 1963. My first question to you will be is, when did you first hear about the assassination of President Kennedy?
I don't remember the exact time, but the word came from the Washington Post. They called and wanted to get negatives, the autopsy. And at the time, I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. I mean, I knew the president was assassinated and all, but I didn't know the body was coming to Bethesda. And it was about an hour or so later that we got the word.
After you received that call from the Washington Post, did you contact anyone?
Yeah, I called Mr. Stringer at home. Well, first I went up and saw the chief of the day, and he didn't know what I was talking about. He didn't have any word that they were coming there. So I called Mr. Stringer at home and told him what had happened. And he said, call him back if I get any official word on it. And let him know that they were bringing him to Bethesda.
And then you did hear something like official word within the next hour or so?
Yeah.
How did you get that information, do you recall?
From the chief of the day.
What did he say to you?
He told he told me that they were bringing President Kennedy there to Bethesda for an autopsy and to get ready. And I called Mr. Stringer because I figured that'd be more like his line, being all this classification and security and all this stuff on there. And I didn't think I was going to have anything to do with it, but anyway, Mr. Stringer came in I had to come up to the main entrance to the hospital to identify him so he could come in and go ahead and do the work.
What was, as best you understand, Mr. Stringer's title or position as of that time?
Director of Medical Photography School.
Now, when you said that you needed to identify him, although I think you and I both know what you're talking about, I'll ask the question, why was it that you needed to identify the director?
Well, they weren't letting anybody in the hospital.
Who is they?
I believe they were Secret Service. And he had to have a reason to be there.
So it was just that the security people were unfamiliar with Mr. Stringer, is that right?
Yeah.
Prior to the time that Mr. Stringer arrived, did you do anything to prepare for taking photographs at the autopsy?
Yes, I went down and got film ready, made sure I had a lot of film cassette holders for a view camera. I got the view camera put on the tripod, and I had extra rolls of film for the 35 millimeter that I was using. I only shot one roll of that. And some film packs for the Speed Graphics that I was using.
And by the film packs, you mean the packs of 12
Yes.
shots, and those were black and white?
Yeah.
From what you said, is that right? Now, you say that you mounted a view camera.
4x5 view camera that Mr. Stringer was using.
Okay. Now, is that different from the Speed Graph?
Yes, it's not. The view camera is not a handheld camera. It has to be on a tripod.
Do you now recall what kind of film you got for the view camera?
I got just color, I believe, and it was some of each, transparencies and negatives.
Do you remember the brand or any other specifications on the film?
Kodak. That's all we had there at the school.
Do you remember any other specifications on the type of film?
No.
But it's your best recollection now that you've had both color negative and transparencies.
And transparencies.
Were both the color negatives and color transparencies both mounted in the cassettes?
Yes. There's 2 per cassette.
Just a moment. The machine decides when I can walk.
Just tired?
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
After Mr. Stringer arrived, did he suggest that you get any other equipment or film for the autopsy?
Yeah, he told me to get my strobe unit, which I didn't have. And I grabbed one, evidently, which I didn't know at the time, wasn't fully charged. And it didn't last long.
What is a strobe unit?
An electronic flash.
Would that be connected to a camera?
Yes.
So that it would fire synchronously with the camera? Did you get any speed lights?
That was the speed light.
Okay. Was there any other form of lighting that was taken into the autopsy?
Not that I can remember, no. Just the available light in the building or in the room and the electronic flash unit that I had.
To the best of your recollection, was there any other film or equipment that was taken into the morgue?
Not that I can think of, no.
Just so I'm clear now, were there 3 cameras that were taken into the room?
3.
One was the Speed Graphics, one was the view camera that was tripod mounted, and the third was the 35 millimeter.
Yes.
And the 35 millimeter camera was your own, is that correct?
Yes.
What brand was that?
It was a Canon.
You mentioned that the speed light was connected to one of the cameras.
Yeah, it was more or less like an internet generic connector, and I use that on my camera too. It was just a little bayonet plug.
So it could have been connected to any of the 3 cameras.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall which model Canon
I don't think. No.
Prior to the time that you went into the morgue, had you been told anything about the nature of the injuries of President Kennedy?
No.
Did you hear of anyone, again, prior to the time the autopsy began, who engaged in any discussion about the nature of the wounds?
No. I was more or less away from the rest of the people.
What else had you heard about the assassination prior to the time that you went into the morgue?
Just what was on the national news. We watched that all day long. That he was shot in the head and expired. That was it.
When did you first see a casket on November 22nd?
I don't recall what time it was. When they brought the body in.
Let me try it another way. Where were you when you first saw the casket?
In the autopsy room there at Bethesda.
Okay, so you were in the morgue room and the casket was brought in.
Right.
But just to make sure, you didn't see a casket prior to that time, either in the hallway or on the loading dock?
No, we were in the room for maybe a half an hour before they brought the casket in.
Could you describe who it was who brought the casket in? Do you recall?
Not really. The people in civilian clothes. Who they were, I don't know.
Could you describe generally the casket, please?
It was kind of a gunmetal gray, dull finish.
Do you recall any knobs on the side or handles?
It had handles on both sides, yes. They were, I believe, a brass type, brass colored in them.
Do you recall whether any handles on the casket were broken, or did you?
I didn't pay that much attention to it.
Did you see the casket opened?
Yes.
Could you describe whether there was one piece of an opening or two pieces? How
it was one piece.
And was the top either lifted off or was it hinged?
It was hinged.
Are you acquainted with the term shipping casket?
Yeah.
And are you acquainted with the term ceremonial casket?
Yes.
Do those two terms describe different sorts of caskets to you? Do you have an opinion as to whether the casket that you first saw President Kennedy arrive in was in a shipping casket or ceremonial?
It wasn't a ceremonial casket. It wasn't. It was a very plain, inexpensive type casket.
Is there any other way, in addition to what you said, that you could describe the difference between the casket that he arrived in and what you understand to be a ceremonial casket?
Well, funerals that I've been to, what I would think would be a ceremonial casket where the top half opens from chest up or waist up, whatever, and it's nicely lined, and it's, I guess you could say, pleasant to look at, but this was just plain.
Did you see at any time any of the lining of the casket that he arrived in?
I more than likely I did, but I don't recall what it looked like.
Did you yourself see the casket being opened?
Yes.
How was President Kennedy dressed or wrapped or?
He was in a rubberized type body bag.
Had you ever seen a bag of that sort before?
Yeah.
Where had you seen it before?
At Bethesda, and we had an accident aboard a tanker that I was on before I went to Bethesda. We had to put a patient in a body bag, freezing.
You'd call this a body bag?
Yeah.
How are body bags sealed, if at all?
Zippers.
Did the zipper go down the side, the front, or?
I think it went down the center, the front.
Do you recall who removed President Kennedy from the bag?
Yeah, it was a man by the name of O'Connor, but I don't know the rest of the people. I wasn't that familiar with a lot of the staff there at the school.
Was the bag opened by cutting it or by opening the zipper?
It was unzipped.
After the zipper was taken off, was there any other covering on the body?
I think the head was wrapped. Other than that, no, that I can recall.
What was the head wrapped in?
think it was a sheet or several towels. One, I'm not really positive.
Could you describe what happened after the zipper had been opened, just in terms of removing the body from the casket? And
well, 3 people picked the body up and set it on the autopsy table.
Okay.
Then they unwrapped the head and they started.
Approximately how much time, as best you recall, was there between the time the body was put on the table and that procedures began with the autopsy?
A half hour, 45 minutes, something like that.
What were the first things that were done to the body after it was unwrapped? And I would include x-rays, photography, incisions. What is the order that you remember the events happened?
Well, I started taking pictures, just general body pictures, and then X-ray came in and we had to leave. They did their thing with the X-rays, and then we were allowed back in there. I think that was just for safety reasons. Those X-rays would have wiped out every bit of film we had anyway.
Do you recall which camera you used at first for these general body pictures?
When I first started, I do believe it was the 35 millimeter Canon.
Let me go back just one step and ask you whether Mr. Stringer gave you any instructions or directions prior to the time that you were in the morgue about what should be done or what shouldn't be done in terms of...
He just said do everything and anything the doctors wanted.
Did he make any suggestions to you about using one type of camera versus another type of camera?
Yeah, he did. He said it would be better to use the big one.
The big one rather than the 35 millimeter?
Yeah.
Did Mr. Stringer at any point say to you, don't take such and such a picture, or do take such and such a picture? Did he leave that up to you?
He more or less left that up to me unless there was something he wanted done. Then he asked me to come over and take a photo of this. But generally, he said, get pictures of the room, all the people in it. She did probably want that later on anyway, so we did.
Now, when you referred a moment ago to the general body pictures that were taken before the X-rays, did those photographs include any people in the room?
It might have included a few hands, but I think that was about all.
Okay, when did you take pictures that included people in the room?
It was after the autopsy started and we got all crowded. I didn't know how many more people were going to come in there, so I figured I'd better get that out of the way, and then I'd be free to do what the doctors wanted.
With those pictures of people in the room, do you recall which camera those were taken with?
On the 4x5. I do think so.
Apart from Mr. Stringer, did anyone else in the room give you any directions or instructions regarding taking or not taking the photographs?
No.
Was it your understanding during the autopsy that Mr. Stringer was the person principally responsible for taking the close-up photos?
Yeah.
Can you tell me how the procedure worked in terms of how Mr. Stringer took the photographs and any role that you played to assist him in taking those pictures?
He did all of his work by himself and the help of the technicians or the physician. I didn't handle the body at all.
Did he, Mr. Stringer, physically move the tripod himself?
Yeah.
And after he had finished taking 2 photographs and would remove the cassette from the view camera, what did he do with the cassette?
They turned right over to Secret Service.
Did he give them to you first? So you never touched then the cassettes that he did?
Right. You take them and then Secret Service would take them from him.
Did you attempt to keep track during the course of the autopsy of the number of photographs that were taken?
No. I just kept track, like on the film packs to how many I used. And that was it. How many cassettes were basically used.
Do you remember now how many cassettes were used?
8 or 10, I believe. I'm really not that positive on that.
So this would be 8 to 10 by Mr. Stringer.
Yeah.
And from what you said before, those would be both color transparencies and negatives, as best you recall?
Yeah.
So if there were then approximately 8 to 10 cassettes, that would mean that there would be conceivably between 16 and 20
pictures.
Okay. Did Mr. Stringer take any black and white photographs, as best you recall?
I don't recall if he did or not.
So he might well have taken them, but you just don't recall, or you think that he didn't?
I don't think he did, because the cassettes were all loaded with color.
Did you take black and white photographs?
Yes.
In the 4x5 format? As best you recall, those were in press packs.
Yes.
Is that right? Could you describe for me the different positions the president, the body, was in for the purpose of taking photographs? I'll just give you an example. I assume one that he's lying on his back, photograph taken. In addition to his lying on his back, what other views or postures was he put in?
I think one was taken, that wound in the back when he was in a sitting position. I think the body was propped up for that. And another one more on the side, but I think it was on the left side.
Just to make sure that I'm understanding, the first one is that his body is lifted up as if he's in sitting posture to take some pictures. And then another one, he's rolled, you think, onto his left side. Was he ever put on his stomach completely, that you recall?
I don't think so. Not all the way over.
Were any photographs taken after incisions in the torso of the body?
Yes.
What photographs do you recall as having been taken?
I don't recall.
Did you take the photographs, or did Mr. Stringer?
Mr. Stringer did, I'm sure.
Do you recall anyone having used any probes in the body during the autopsy?
I think Dr. Fink did for that wound in the back, but he didn't go in very far, and they didn't let it go from there.
Do you recall whether a photograph was taken while there was a probe in the body?
I don't think so.
Do you recall any probes in the head?
No, I don't recall that.
Are you acquainted with the terms having the scalp reflected? Having the scalp pulled back?
Pulled back, yeah.
Were any photographs taken with the scalp pulled back?
They pulled back into place?
I'm sorry, I'm glad that folded back so that the skull would be exposed.
I believe there was, yes.
Do you recall whether any pictures were taken from angles very close to the inside of the cranium?
Yeah, I think Mr. Stringer did that when the body was on the side.
Were any pictures taken of President Kennedy from above?
Meaning like from the ceiling?
So, for example, with either you or Mr. Stringer climbing a ladder, for example, taking pictures.
Not that I can recall, no.
You don't recall any ladders in the room?
No.
You said previously that you took 35 millimeter photos. Approximately how many rolls of film did you take?
Just part of one roll. I think only 6 or 7 exposures.
Was that film in black and white or color?
I don't remember.
What was done with, when you had finished with that one roll of 35 millimeter film, what did you do with that?
I took it out of the camera and gave it to one of the secret agents there.
Did you ever see that film subsequently?
No.
Have you ever told any researchers that you took 4 or 5 rolls of film?
No.
Approximately how many black and white 4x5 shots did you take?
About 8 or 9 film packs. That would be, 111, something like that. Between 99 and 111.
And those were all, just as we said, black and white
Yes.
before.
Yes.
And approximately 100, so to speak.
Right around there, yeah.
Did you take any films from duplex film holders, or was everything press pack for you?
I don't remember. I may have used one cassette, but I don't remember right now.
What did you do with the 4x5 exposures after you had completed them?
After the pack was used, they were given to the security officer.
Have you ever seen any of those films since? Now, you mentioned earlier that some photographs, or at least a photograph, was taken after there had been an incision on the body. Is that right? How long during the course of the autopsy did you take photographs? And let me try it by saying, did you do it throughout the entire autopsy, or was it just towards the beginning, or how did that work?
Throughout the whole autopsy.
Was the same true for Mr. Stringer?
Yeah, he was there until the autopsy was finished.
After the autopsy was completed, did you take any further photographs?
No.
Were you present in the room when any reconstruction was performed on President Kennedy? Did you take any photographs after reconstruction of President Kennedy?
No, I didn't.
After the autopsy was completed, did you leave the room with Mr. Stringer? Or do you know whether he stayed in the autopsy room?
He left. I I left and went down to the lab to take the cameras and all that stuff back. And he came down a few minutes later. It wasn't a minute or two later, so he probably left right after I did.
After your work had been completed, did you ever talk to Mr. Stringer about what had happened that night?
I don't think we did. It was a very upsetting day for everybody. I think when we were done, he just came back to the office, did some paperwork, and then he went on home. And since I was on duty that night, I just stayed right there in the apartment.
Did you ever hear of anyone taking any photographs of President Kennedy's body after the autopsy was completed?
No.
Do you know whether there were any photographs? Let me withdraw that. Did you see the brain removed from President Kennedy?
What little bit there was left, yes.
Were any photographs taken of the brain?
I think I did some when they were putting it in that stainless steel pail.
When you say that there was not much left, what do you mean by that?
Well, it was less than half of the brain there.
Did you notice whether the doctors weighed the brain?
I don't remember.
Did you ever participate subsequently in any post-autopsy examination of the brain?
No.
Did you ever hear whether any other photographer participated in a post-autopsy examination of the brain?
No.
would like you to describe, as best you recall, provide a description of the injuries to President Kennedy's head. So we'll say from above the throat, not the throat, but above the throat. What did you observe on the body?
The right side in the back was gone. Just a big gaping hole with fragments of scalp and bone hanging in it.
Now, when you said that, you put your hand on the back of your head.
The occipital.
The occipital area of that. Did you see any other, in addition to that injury that you just described, did you see any other injuries to the head?
Yeah, there was a flap of bone over on the side, above the temporal area.
So, and I notice again that your gesture is you're pointing above your right ear.
Yeah.
How close of an observation did you get to the wounds on President Kennedy's head?
About 5-6 feet, something like that.
So the distance, I'd say the distance you and I are sitting from each other is about 5 feet or so. And it would be about that distance. That was as close as you got to the head. What was the position of the body when you made that observation about the nature of
It was on his side.
Did you observe any injuries to the neck or throat?
No, to me it looked like a tracheostomy was done in the throat. Kind of over-exaggerated, but that's what it looked like.
When you say over-exaggerated, you mean?
Oh, it was bigger than I've seen before.
Mr. Reedy, subsequent to the time that you were present in the autopsy room, have you ever seen any of the original autopsy photographs?
No, I've never seen a photograph taken.
Okay, what I would like to do is have the original material brought in and have you take a look at that, and I'll ask you some questions about that if we can come back. Take a break while the material is being assembled. I got a bit of drink of water.
Mr. Levy, can you see before you now the images that have been marked, color numbers color numbers 29 and 30, and black and white numbers 1 and 2?
Yes.
Do those resemble, first, in a general way, the view that you saw at Bethesda on the night of November 22nd, 1963?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you see in either of those images, the color transparencies, color positive transparencies, or the black and white reverse transparencies that differ in any significant way from your observations?
I don't think so.
Mr. Reeby, can you identify the type of film, either in the color or the black and white, as you stand here today?
The color was Kodak. Well, I mean, that's saying much. You can identify the film by the notches in the top, but it's been so long since I've used this type of film that...
That's fine. Can you identify whether the black and white images are from a press pack or not? Are you able to do that?
Not without feeling them. Press pack is really paper thin because they have to pack so many in there. But I don't think that is, because that has got, both of them have notches on the top, and they appear to be too thick. The press pack is, like I said, paper thin because you have 12 sheets in a small area. It's like the old Polaroid. You move it around.
Sure. So based upon just your visual observations, they would appear, the black and white images appear not to be from a press pack, but you're not certain. Is that fair?
No, they're not from a film pack. They're notched on top and they're too thick.
Okay, so you're reasonably confident those are not from the press pack. Could you identify, as you see in the photographs, what appears to be something like a stirrup on which President Kennedy's head is resting?
Yes. That's a stainless steel headrest.
Do you recall seeing the stirrup on the night of November 22nd? One way or the
I
other?
may have, but I don't remember.
Okay, that's fine.
Part of the wound is apparent in President Kennedy's throat. Does that correspond, at least generally, with what you observed on the night of the autopsy?
Roughly, yeah. It was basically in that same area.
Is there anything that seems to you to be unusual or not what you would expect with regard to what appears to be the white and blue towel under President Kennedy's head?
I really don't remember that towel. Or a towel. I mean, there might have been one there, but I don't know why.
Okay. Is there anything in the background of the room that seems unusual or different from your recollection? For example, the tiles on the wall or the telephone?
No, not really.
Okay. That's fine. Now, do you see any significant injuries to the left side of President Kennedy's head?
No.
And does that correspond reasonably closely with your own recollection?
Yes.
Okay. We then go to the second view, which has been described as the right side of head and right shoulder. Black and white images numbers 5 and 6, color numbers 26, 27, and 28. Mr. Reedy, are you able to see those images that I just described reasonably closely now?
Yeah.
Do those images correspond, at least in a general way, with what you observed at the autopsy of President Kennedy on November 22nd?
Yes.
Is there anything that you see in those images that appears to be different from what you recall that night?
Well, the wound is placed different, but it could be just different. The wound is more on the top side of the head, not in the back.
When you say the wound, you're referring to the wound as it appears in the photograph,
yes,
is in a location somewhat different from what you recollected from memory?
It could be. It just, yeah. My recollection could have been off too from whatever that night. But that looks about right.
Once again, there's not a very clear view, but somewhat of a view of the wound in the neck. And again, I understand that this is not a very good view of that. Is there anything that differs from what you recall from the night of November 22nd?
Not really, no. About that general location where tracheotomy would have been done.
Do you have any reason to believe that these photographs were taken by, or these photographs were not taken by Mr. Stringer or yourself on the night of November 22nd?
I don't think so.
That is, that you would presume that they were taken either by you or Mr. Stringer. Are you able to say with any confidence whether they were taken by you or Mr. Stringer?
No.
You might have been the one to take them, but you're not certain?
On the color, I don't think I was. In fact, I'd almost swear to it. That was done with a view camera.
So your presumption then is at least that the color photographs were taken by Mr. Stringer,
yeah,
and that you may or may not have taken the black and white.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it reasonably possible that those pictures could have been taken by the same camera, just with a different cassette?
Yes, possible.
Film holder.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Could we then go to the third view, which is described in the 1966 inventory as the superior view of the head? That corresponds to black and white numbers 7, 8, and 9, and 10, and color numbers 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37. Mr. Reedy, can you now see those photographs in front of you?
Yes.
I'd like you to look at those and just tell me with, in a general sense, whether those images correspond to what you observed on November 22nd?
From this view, yeah, it does.
Do you have any reason to believe that these photographs are inaccurate in any way?
No.
With respect to the black and white photographs, are you able to determine from visual observation whether they are from a press pack or from a film holder?
They're from a film holder.
Okay, you can go to the next. If I can try one more question. No, that's okay. Mr. Reeby, as you look into the top of the skull of President Kennedy, do you see what appears to you to be brain tissue? Or how would you describe the matter that appears to be extruding from the
macerated brain tissue?
And just once again, that corresponds with what you observed on the night of the autopsy. Okay. The next view that we will be looking at is the fourth view, which was described as a posterior view of wounded entrance of missile high and shoulder, corresponding to black and white numbers 11 and 12, and color numbers 38 and 39. Mr. Reeby, do you see those images before you now?
Yes, I do.
In a general way, do they correspond to your observations on November 22nd, 1963?
Yes.
Is there anything about them that appears to be inaccurate to you?
No, but I'm getting a sense of strange feelings here. The black and white are exact to the color, and that can't be. That's an impossibility. Compare them. Position of the hands, position of the head.
As you look at the black and white images, do those appear to be from a press pack or from
No, they're from a cassette. I mean, a film holder.
With two images in them?
Right.
Now, would it be your assumption that the color photographs were taken with a tripod, or mounted on a tripod?
Yes.
If the tripod were kept in the same position and a new cassette or a new film holder were inserted, could the pictures be reasonably close?
Yeah.
So when you have made your observation about the closeness of the parent images, that's without having made a very technical operation of slight change?
Yeah. The hands on the shoulders in the black and white.
Okay, so you do notice the difference between them, the two, so those are not exactly the same.
They're not copies, no.
Now, could you look at the back of President Kennedy's head in the occipital region? You previously used the term occipital, is that right?
Yes. It's one piece.
Does that correspond with what you observed on the night of November 22nd?
Yeah.
So that where it appears, at least to me, as if there is hair and scalp covering the occipital area, that does not differ from what you saw on November 22nd?
I don't think so, no.
So it seems to be a reasonably accurate description?
Yeah.
Okay, so turn that to you.